Welcome to ILMA's first town hall. It's an exciting thing. We had hoped at one point to have a live town hall in person, but as we all know, that didn't work out. So we're going virtual. And we do have another town hall planned later this month on June 24th, and you'll be getting registration information to come. My name is Holly Alfano. I'm the CEO of ILMA, if you don't know me. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, if there are any members of the press on, please get in touch with Brenda Gillinson before you publish any quotes from the town hall. And all participants, please note at the bottom of your screen the Q&A function. You have the ability to pose questions of the panelists, and others can actually vote on the questions. If you like a question, you can like it, and that'll make it go up to the top, and we will hopefully address some of those. I want to introduce someone that has been a good friend throughout the year, a great mentor. Most of you know our 2020 president. He's the president of American Oil and Supply, and I've been calling him COVID Chuck. He's the first ILMA president to have the distinction of serving during a pandemic. That is certainly something to go down in ILMA history. In any case, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to welcome you, everyone.
Thank you, Holly, and to all the participants. It means a lot to us because the ILMA staff and Holly and Jeff and the group are working really hard right now. So hello and welcome to the first ILMA Town Hall, the Zoom call. We've never done this type of deal before, but we're going to give it a good shot today. So be patient at times also in case there are some issues along the way. 2019, 2020 started out great for me as president of ILMA. The Broadmoor meeting was excellent. The content was really well done by the association and the speakers and the like. From there, Holly and I went off to the UEIL, to France, and to the UK LA in London. And there was a lot of discussion with their board members and their executives. And there was going to be a lot more collaboration starting to happen amongst the associations from all aspects of the business. The January E-Committee meeting went really well, and most of you who were there know everybody got the flu at some time or another. I did for sure, and I could be COVID. Well, then COVID-19 hit. This changed our world. Holly and I, I'm going to stick just to the ILMA side of things. Holly and I had a lot of plans going forward. We were going to do the NLGI and the STLE. And as Holly mentioned just a bit earlier, we were going to do town halls throughout the country. We weren't sure exactly where yet, but it was a recruiting tool for ILMA members, but also to have our current members know what's going on at all times. ILMA Engage, unfortunately, we had to cancel. The board, I want to thank the board and the E-Committee for the calls we had and making the decision easy for me, because it was unanimous decision to cancel that meeting, obvious reasons. The last thing I'm going to speak about before we get into the content of this call is the ILMA staff. I just want to praise our ILMA staff. Holly, our CEO, has done a terrific job managing the stay-at-home, work-at-home situation. Martha, Brenda, Amber, Tim, Meg, Margaret have done a terrific job, and I praise you guys. You've really kept it together. Also, I want to thank Jeff, Jeff Leiter, our attorney, who I always call the backbone of ILMA. He's just always there for you, and also his associate Matt for the work behind the scenes. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to pass the microphone back to Holly, and we're going to get moving ahead here. Holly?
Yeah. As Chuck mentioned, ILMA Engage had to be canceled, but I just want to say we are going ahead with our annual meeting, Essential ILMA, which will be October 24th through 27th in Boca Raton. So ILMA is as essential to our members as our members are essential to the economy. So look for registration to open up on June 22nd, and more details on that to come. One thing we want to do at the meeting is recognize all of our members' hard work as essential businesses during the pandemic. So if you have photos of your employees in the plant, you know, practicing social distancing and employing safe practices, please send them to us. We want to recognize the contribution of our members to keep the economy going during the pandemic. Our goal was to provide as many resources as we could so that you would have the tools you need to be successful. And I hope that we succeeded in that. And if there's anything that you need from us at any time, but especially now, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And speaking of resources, pretty soon, we've actually launched a new app. So if you have your old app, you can delete it and download the new one from the App Store. It's got everything you need right in the palm of your hand. All the resources that are on the website, all of our COVID resources are there. So please take a look at it. So without further ado, we're going to move on to the program today. Our first panel is professionals that from IHS Markit. Late last year, the ILMA Foundation and ILMA hired IHS Markit to do a study on the economic impact of our industry. It was completed in February, and I have to say I was extremely impressed by the results and the findings of the study. Especially one number that flew out to me was our members' $7.2 billion impact on GDP. You're going to hear about the findings today, but the ink was barely dry on the study when COVID-19 hit and the economy came to a halt. So, you know, I was enjoying this great study and that I've waited for so long. Ever since I've been at ILMA, I've wanted this information. And then all of a sudden, overnight, everything changed. And my questions for the team at IHS were, how does the current economic situation affect the findings? And we're going to hear about some of that today. So without further ado, Chuck is going to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Okay, thank you, Holly, and good job. So I'm going to read some bios of both Bob and Suzan, and it's quite, I'm going to read it because there's a lot of information here. They're very successful people. So Bob and Suzan are going to talk about different things, but Bob Flanagan is a consulting director in the IHS Markit Economics and Country Risk Team, where he heads the Global Economic Impact Analysis practice. Bob helps clients strengthen their stakeholder engagement programs by effectively communicating how their businesses operate, stimulate economic and social impact contributions. He also advises clients on the potential economic ramifications of disruptive shifts in their markets and industries, including emergent competitive threats, deployment of new technology infrastructures, and of course now, pandemics. It's a whole new market for Bob here. Now Suzan Jagger is Vice President of Oil Markets, Midstream and Downstream in the IHS Markit's New York office. She's currently leads the Global Lubricant Consulting practice. For 30 years, she has been a world-recognized consultant in the global lubricants business, as well as the broader downstream refining and marketing sector. So I apologize I had to read that, but you can imagine if I had to try to memorize that. So I'm now going to pass the mic to Suzan and Bob, and you guys can take it from here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Alrighty, well, thank you very much, Chuck and Holly, and welcome everyone to the first ILMA virtual town hall. On behalf of Suzan and all of my colleagues at IHS Markit, we appreciate the opportunity to come meet with you in this setting, and hopefully you'll find what we have to share with you engaging, and we're hoping that it'll stimulate some conversation, not only today, but amongst the membership going forward. As Holly mentioned when she was doing her introduction, things have changed dramatically. As she said, we had published a report on the economic contribution that ILMA and its membership makes to the North American economies. And we published that in February. And right after that, we started going into preparation to come down to the ILMA Engage event that was in the beginning of April. A summary of the findings of the report were published in Compoundings magazine in the April issue. And then COVID happened. And so we're in a much, much more different world than when that study first came out. So let me just pop over here and start sharing my presentation. Okay, are we live?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right, so normally what we would do at a time like this, whether it was a virtual meeting or a live session where we'd all be in the same room, normally after a study like this comes out, we would come down and meet with you all and present the findings of the study. But as we said, things have changed quite a bit since the study first came out. So what we're going to do instead today is we're going to kind of split the short time that we have together into 3 sections. One is to do the quick overview of what we found in the study that was published in February. Then part 2 is kind of talk a little bit about the COVID reality that's emerging. And this is still emerging. There's still lots of moving parts here and many different ways that things can play out. But we'll share with you what we know right now. And then at the end, I'm going to turn it over to Suzan for just general industry commentary. I'm the economist in the picture, and Suzan is the expert on the industry here. So what I'll tell you might sound a little bit more like economist-focused, econo-speak, as I like to say, whereas I'll try to put some context into it, but Suzan can take it to a different level for you and field some of the questions that you might have going forward. Okay. All right, so first of all, what is an economic impact analysis? Basically what we do is, in an economic impact analysis, we look at the ongoing business operations of either an industry or even discrete companies and track the economic activity that they stimulate in the local economies where they're doing business. So that gets translated into key metrics such as the impact on employment, GDP, wages, and so on, government revenues, and so on. And often what happens is organizations such as ILMA may use some of the findings to promote the good economic contributions that the industry is making. Yeah, so in late 2019, ILMA came to IHS, Markit, to request that we look into the contribution that the ILMA membership is making to the economies of North America. So we looked at the contributions that are stimulated in the US, Canada, and Mexico in 2018. So what I'll do in the next few slides is kind of go over some of the key findings that we had from that study, bring you through a little bit more about how economic impact kind of works as well too, and then we'll move on to the COVID discussion. Okay, so what we do in an economic impact study, or sometimes we'll call it an economic contribution study as well, is we look at 3 types of economic contribution. There's what we call direct, indirect, and induced contributions, and I'll explain these as we go through the process here. And we generally look at 5 key metrics as we go through it. One is sales activity, which economists like to call gross output. The second one is a contribution to GDP, which economists tend to call value added. The contribution to jobs and wages, and then also the contribution that's made to government revenues, taxes, and then any residual is profit for the industry or the company that we are currently studying. So we've got 3 levels of contribution, that direct, indirect, and induced, in these 5 different metrics. How do they all kind of interact? How do they all fit together for us to do this kind of analysis? So the first step in the direct is customers of ILMA members come to them to buy lubricants and so on. So there's a direct exchange of money between ILMA membership and their customer base. Now, once that money comes in-house, theoretically, what happens to that money? Where does it go? Well, there's two routes that it generally takes. One is the downward arrow, which is intermediate purchases, so buying your supplies and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the other piece is value added. And value added is actually the contribution that you make to GDP. So if you were to take basically your sales activity and subtract off your intermediate, your supply purchases and such, do not include labor income in there, but just the actual non-labor materials and services. That'll give you a rough idea of the contribution that you're making to the gross domestic product. So now, when you come to the gross domestic product, there's a couple of things that happen with that. The first is the value added is used to hire and retain and pay employees. Employees are paid out of the pool of value added funds. And second, value added is also used to pay taxes. And anything that's left over after that point is the profit for the industry or the company that we are studying. And in addition, workers pay personal taxes as well too. So there's a little bit of a double hit there. Now let's go back over to the left side, lower left, to talk about the indirect contributions. When you, okay, why is this not advancing? Hold on a second. Just see. There it goes. Okay, just had I think a network delay there. Sorry. All right. So when you purchase your supplies in order to create your products and services, that stimulates the entire cycle all over again. So you get the supplier, the whole supply chain effect, the suppliers, all the way down through multiple tiers of the supply chain. And that same sales to value added to wages to taxes to profits cycle spins again and again all the way through the supply chain. And then after that, we kind of leave the companies behind for a moment and focus in on the workers. You're paying salaries and wages to workers, both your direct that you hire directly and also all the ones that are in the supply chain. They then turn around and go and spend money locally in the economy. And we're once again not getting a delay. We're getting a delay here again. So give that just 1 second.
Yeah, Bob, as we said earlier, there's going to be a little.
Yes, this worked fine in rehearsal. So let me, all right, so we'll try doing this. Actually, there we go. All right, so what happens is the workers, both your direct workers as well as all the workers in the supply chain, take a large piece of their wages and earnings and they spend them in the local economies on consumer goods and services. And that's what we call induced effects. So if you take all of those together, direct, indirect, and induced, you have the total economic contribution that's being made. All right, so now, in order to do the analysis that we published in February, we took 3 steps to get to the modeling part, prior to getting to the modeling part. One is IHS Markit. So Suzan's group and her team, her predecessor, Blake, looked at the North American lubricants market. So everything from the geographic split, how much is US versus Canada versus Mexico, the different classes of lubricants, and then a little bit of deeper dive into the transport and industrial process. So it had a good idea from where the production activity is occurring, how much in terms of volume and such, and we were able to derive a volume share of the ILMA membership for transport, metalworking fluids, and just other industrial. That was the main focus. We weren't really looking at the consumer end of things. We were focused in on these areas. And by and large, ILMA membership in the North American economy accounts for about 27% of the volume of lubricants that are produced. And then finally, if we impose some pricing schedules on that for the different classes of lubricants, we can actually put a value on the lubricants that are being produced by ILMA members. So in 2018, that total was about $6.6 billion worth of output in terms of in revenue terms. And you'll notice I have a couple of those columns highlighted in green, the metalworking fluids and the total. That's because when we reported out the findings, we focused in on the overall impact, which is the total column, as well as the metalworking fluids, because that's a key constituent of ILMA. And now you'll see these same green numbers appear on the next slide. This is the summary of the findings that we had in terms of the contribution that ILMA stimulates in North America, broken out by the US, Canada, and Mexico. We looked at the sales activity, the GDP or the value-added contribution, labor income, and employment here. And you'll see the green numbers that are highlighted. That's the direct revenue that occurs, that the ILMA membership realizes. But you'll see that if, can you actually see my cursor if I do this? Can you see a cursor floating in there now?
Yeah.
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, perfect. So if you look at here, for example, overall, in terms of sales revenue, ILMA members in 2018 realized, I should say, about $6.653 billion worth of revenue. But if you look at the supply chain, that's the indirect effects, they stimulated another $6.2 billion worth of activity as it rippled through the supply chain. And then as the workers on both the direct and indirect went out and spent money in the local economies, that stimulated another $1.5 billion worth of sales activity in North America. So the total of that is, about $14.4 billion worth of sales activity. So you have a multiplier of greater than 2, right? So there, you start with the direct revenue that the ILMA membership realizes of $6.65 billion, and then that multiplies up to a total of $14.4 billion by the time all of those supply chain ripples and induced ripples are taken into account. And then if you then extend over into the GDP, the value added column, that translates to, in North America, about $7.2 billion of GDP contribution. About 6.5 of that is in the US. It stimulates about 2.7 roughly billion dollars worth of labor income or wages, and employs about 26,000 people. Now we also focused in on the metalworking fluids sector, and that follows the exact same path here. You have about $1.4 billion worth of metalworking fluid revenues that are generated in North America in 2018. And that in turn triggers about $3 billion worth of total sales activity across North America, and winds up employing about 4,000, people can attribute their jobs, about 4,000 of them, to the metalworking fluids sector, okay? So those are great findings, those multipliers of 2 on sales activity and going, to $7.2 billion worth of GDP contribution. Those are great numbers. And I think we also did what we call like a forward linkage analysis for the metalworking fluid sector, where we tried to look a little bit downstream of the users of metalworking fluids and how much influence they have on the economy. And it was roughly about 4% of North American GDP economy is influenced by users of lubricants. So that's a pretty powerful statement to be able to say that, the ILMA memberships helps companies that drive 4% of the North American economy. However, that was before COVID, right? So this great messaging right now, but at the time, but then, as we're preparing to go down to the meetings, do the presentations and all that, COVID hit. So let's talk a little bit about COVID, okay? COVID is what we would call a classic black swan event. Okay? It was something that was not anticipated. It had an extreme shock and a rapid shock to the economy, and really amped up the uncertainty in a lot of markets, a lot of sectors. And what I'll do is I go through this. I'll show you a couple of before and after forecasts that IHS Markit had. We had some for January that are in the presentation. I'll show you how they changed by May. And it's incredible how quickly things can change. So now I won't read every single one of these. Sorry about that. Every one of these bullets, but I think we're pretty much aware of a lot of these from just everything that everyone's living through, all the press coverage, all the work from home time that everyone has. But basically, millions of people globally will be infected. Many will become extremely ill. The death count in the U.S. alone is projected to be about 140,000 by August. And basically, economies just came to a grinding halt starting in mid to late March. And it's unprecedented. We've never really done anything like this before, where we've gone from an economy that was humming along pretty well in the U.S. to over 30 million people filing for unemployment within a matter of a few weeks. Significant effects on people's wealth. I mean, the markets are starting to bounce back a bit more, but they totally cratered back then. A lot of uncertainty around people being able to make mortgage payments, rent payments, and so on. And also, this is exacerbated in some industries by the fact that oil prices collapsed as well too. Many of IHS Markit's clients are in that sector, and they're getting hit with the double whammy of a low price regime plus all of the COVID reality that's arising all around them. So there's still quite a bit of uncertainty out there. We hope that a vaccine will be developed soon. There could be something by the end of this year, but it'll still take some time for that to roll out. And so we're all kind of keeping our fingers crossed as things slowly begin to reopen. Let's see. And as far as the U.S., just to give you a couple of points on here, the real trough of the impact was the second quarter. So hopefully we're starting to claw back out of it as things start to reopen slowly. But at an annualized rate in the second quarter, consumer spending was down at an annualized rate about 43%, and GDP about 37%. So as many of you are probably aware, the U.S. Economy in particular is very much driven by consumer activity. So if consumers are not spending, then everything declines very rapidly and very significantly. So overall, for 2020, we're now forecasting consumer spending is going to be down about 9.6%. The GDP decline relative to 2019 is going to be down 8.8%. And the unemployment rate is going to go from basically a historic low up to almost 20%. And the only silver lining in this is inflation is not going to be that high for consumers, but no one's spending money, so it's kind of becomes a moot point. One of the key assumptions that we had in our forecast is the pandemic will subside during this third quarter that we're in currently. So hopefully any sort of resurgence will be quickly dealt with and not get out of control. We do expect the Fed to keep rates low for the foreseeable future. And a lot of the federal response is adding to our debt and stuff. And then other assumptions we're assuming are going to continue on, like the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement is still going to proceed and be implemented in July. But anything can change. Okay, so let's take a quick look at GDP. All right, so the first two charts here on the left and center of this, you'll see GDP and unemployment. This green line, where the January forecast and the May forecast are still in sync, kind of part ways here. The January forecast is this line that looks very small, these little columns that look very small along here. That's what we were saying in January, that the economy was kind of humming along, it was doing fine. And by March and April, we were down here. So totally unprecedented shift to GDP that I think caught a lot of people totally off they were not well prepared for that dramatic a swing. So what we'll see is a rapid decline in this year and kind of a whipsaw back up next year, and then kind of a settling down towards equilibrium. The unemployment did a similar thing. Here we have the peak coming out of the Great Recession and a continual kind of decline in unemployment, and then all of a sudden COVID hits and we spike up to nearly 20%. And you'll see here the curve never at least through the 2024 timeframe does not come back to the projection before. So the unemployment rate is going to stay a little bit higher for a while. The chart on the right, this is just to highlight some of the components of GDP that we see. The one to focus in on initially is this dark green one. That's consumer spending, that's household spending patterns. And you see how much of consumer spending, how much it influences GDP. So if consumers aren't spending, and if their confidence is low, GDP will track very closely with that. The other thing to point out here is this light green box. That's inventory. What we're anticipating in 2020 is sort of an inventory drawdown and then a restocking in 2021 before it kind of goes back to more normal levels. So that's why you have a big box here is the drawdown, and then the big box up in 2021 is just as things get restocked. Okay. Now, in terms of job losses, we've heard a lot about job losses in like the hotel, the leisure, retail, and so on. But it's actually affecting across a wide swath of industries. For example, manufacturing, 1.3 million jobs lost as of April. Those have gone up a bit since then. And you also see on the right side, no state in the US will be unaffected. Obviously, some much more significantly than others, but everyone is feeling this. This is definitely a we're all in this together kind of mode. The entire economy is kind of down and it's all kind of trying to come back, but it's this is not a localized event in terms of a region or an industry. This is everyone kind of feeling the pain together. Obviously, with consumers not being out there spending money on more of the service end of things, you see a bigger hit in like leisure, hospitality, retail, and professional services. But it's drawing down a lot of the rest of the economy as well. Okay, so quick focus in on the consumer end of things. The key things to focus in on here: consumption, as I've mentioned before, it's going to be down about 8.3% overall. And you'll see here on this chart that real GDP tracks very closely with consumer spending. So a key to the economy recovering is consumer confidence coming back up. And you see that's what this chart is down here in the lower left. That's looking at the Michigan Index of Consumer Sentiment. You see it's kind of tanked a bit here as we've entered into COVID. It was doing okay, reasonably well prior to that. Not as bad as over here. That's the Great Recession area, and then I think around here is like the fiscal cliff time. So the confidence is a little higher than back then, but those are pretty significant and dire times. But what we need to do is see the consumer attitudes come up, and you'll also see things like housing sales and vehicle sales taking a hit for a while as well too. So you see they were humming along pretty well, over 16 million units, and that's going to drop for the next while and not recover until probably 2024, 2025 timeframe. Okay. And then in terms of industrial production, we were looking at in January, we were saying, okay, industrial production is about to bottom out and it's going to start recovering. And now we've got the extreme drop for the beginning of 2020 and a slow build back up and sort of that whipsaw into 2021 and then back to some sort of normalization. So now, we went through the economic impact cycles in the beginning of the talk. How might COVID affect some of those cycles? Okay, so there's really two areas where that can happen in general. One is just simply lower demand. Okay, so if sales activity is down, that's going to have a ripple effect through the entire process. So if your sales are down 10%, you're probably going to buy 10% on average, around 10% less supplies, which is going to affect the entire supply chain. That's just going to ripple down through that. The second area is consumer confidence. Remember, the induced effects are the workers within the direct and indirect companies going out and spending some of their wages in the local economies. And they're not doing that right now. So if we stay in a COVID environment for much longer or have a relapse in the fall, we could see kind of a double whammy of lower sales activity and lower consumer activity. And that becomes actually a kind of a vicious cycle as well too, because if consumers aren't spending money, that's going to come back up here to the lower sales activity in the direct component as well too. So those are the two areas where it can have an effect. Okay, so now in preparation for today's discussion, I went back and I tried to do what I mentioned earlier about forward linkage analysis. That's looking at the industries that are buying lubricants. And so I looked at the overall market in North America as well as focusing on the metalworking fluids. This is not intended to be a formal forecast by IHS Markit, because that would take a redoing of the entire study that the one that we published in February, kind of totally redoing that. This is just to give an idea of, based on the momentum, the sales activity momentum that we see for the downstream companies, the users of lubricants, what can happen over the next couple of years. And so I indexed it to 2018. So a value of 100 is equivalent to the sales from 2018. So for the overall market, you'll see, following the orange line, that as we come into 2020, we're going to kind of hit bottom sometime this year, and then start to climb out through 2021, 2022, and between the 2022-2023 timeframe, we'll be back at 2018 levels, which means you can view it as we will have lost about 3 to 4 years worth of sales activity, and then we're kind of starting to build back up after that. In terms of the metalworking fluids, a lot of their key sectors are going to be down for a while. A lot of their key manufacturing sectors are going to have a bigger hit in terms of their output and revenue. So that's going to consequently keep the metalworking fluids market down over the next, for an extended period. And you'll see, indexing the metalworking fluids to 100 is 2018 revenue levels. We're going to drop to below 80% of that, like 75% this year, and then slowly begin rising up. And you notice that by 2025, we're at 90%, 92%, something like that, but we haven't recovered fully. And even if I extended this curve out to 2030, that may not come back up to the 100 level yet. So this is going to be down for a while on that. And with that, I'll pass it over to Suzan for some comments on, to kind of help bring in a little bit more industry context to all of this.
Well, thanks, Bob. And it's great to have a chance to, well, it's not a great time to be talking about this, but at least if I can at least talk about what we see in the immediate market right now, what we see marketers and other participants in the supply chain see in terms of the disruptions, and maybe provide a little bit of view of some of the issues coming out of this and how we might have to deal with these. it was an interesting curve, Bob, that you showed about the revenue stream and the revenue index, and it sort of gives a profile of the shape of the recovery of the market. If we look at the IHS Markit demand models, and we started taking a pulse on 2020 at the end of March. And in March timeframe, at the end of March, we really hadn't seen the full impact in 2020. We were just starting to feel it in the US market. And at that point, our demand models were saying that probably on average for 2020, the decline would be in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% down relative to the average of where we were in sales volume for 2019. Then, of course, the bottom fell out. And the bottom started falling out in April, and the bottom continued to fall out to some extent through mid-May. And by the end of May now, we're starting to see some uplift in the marketplace. But now, looking at not just that pattern, but also the change in economic forecast that Bob talked about, basically those expectations have almost doubled. So if we're now looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% down on average relative to 2019 in the USA market. That's an indicator. And with the economic forecast we have going forward, the question that's asked from most people is, well, when do we get back to 2019? Do we ever get back to 2019 levels? There are a number of challenges there. If we look at the entirety of the marketplace, we're looking at beyond 2023, 2024, as Bob said, for the entire market to come back. The consumer market, of course, is affected by consumer dynamics, is lagging the trend. But by 2023, 2022, we still fall short of where we were in 2019. So that's the picture we have. As we go forward, we continue to look at this. It's as if we, again, in another couple months, we'll be looking at the data. This is all new. There's a lot of unknowns to this, as Bob talked about. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I just had
Hey, Bob, if we're not going to use the slides, if you take them down,
Sure.
because of the picture view, they can get a better view of Susan speaking.
There we go.
Okay.
I'm
Definitely.
sorry, we had a bit of a power blip here. So you guys can hear me?
Oh, that's perfect, Bob.
Okay.
Yes, we can, Susan.
Okay, great. So let me continue. So that's kind of the shape of what's happening right now. But let's talk about the real, the challenges and the issues. And the immediate issue is in the supply chain of the business. And we have this incredible disruption that's occurred in terms of the impact on our ability to distribute, to manage our inventories, to manage our plant environment, to control stocking levels, to control production, and how we're going to manage that relative to what's happened in terms of the variations in demand by sector, by product category. All of this disruption is going to require a lot of flexibility in the next couple of years in order to manage. And when you think about it, the largest in our market, the largest marketers, basically will probably have a much better capacity to outlast this disruption financially. But generally speaking, they tend to be less nimble in the market in making adjustments to their plant, to their distribution, to their inventory, and to be able to be flexible to adapt to these changes. When we look back at what happened in the USA market competitively, if we look at the growth of independents that occurred in the last recession, during the period of 2008, 2009, what we witnessed in effect was that the smaller, more nimble, more flexible, faster moving companies that could adjust more quickly took advantage of the opportunity during that time and actually gained significantly in share in the marketplace. And I think that's probably what we have as an industry, what we may see again, is that those that can move more quickly and adjust and find opportunities, particularly in sectors or areas of our country that are recovering more quickly and can move in and take advantage of it, those will have an opportunity to move and take advantage of it. So it's a very different market. And the message is we need to move quickly. But as market volumes have collapsed and sales don't recover to the pre-COVID levels, we do face some very difficult decisions. And those decisions are around where do we maybe shut our plants and outsource versus insourcing our production and consolidate to optimize production, warehousing, and logistics costs. So these are going to be very difficult decisions. And if we look at the trajectory of the market, it's not as if we have a V here. It's a very gradual recovery that we're talking about, regardless of the scenarios that we're looking at, and regardless of the change in the size of the dip here, we're still looking at a very gradual recovery. So we have to make a case-by-case decision of where this is going to occur, and it sets the stage in our business across the entirety of the value chain of the business, whether we're talking about additives, base oil, manufacturing, distribution, trade operations. It sets the stage for a further acceleration of the consolidation that we've seen in the US and North America in the industry. So again, it presents opportunities, but different types of opportunities, and for those that can move with it. So that's just generally the environment we're looking at.
I'd like to interject with a few questions now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. We have a few questions in the queue. But first of all, I want to ask you, from your perspective, how well do you think ILMA members are positioned? It's kind of what you were talking about earlier, to weather through this crisis. And Bob, what factors do you think could speed up or hinder the post-COVID recovery?
No, again, I think it's a great question. And I look by example at how well, in effect, the ILMAs did during the recession, the last recession. They made tremendous gains in terms of market position. They were able to take advantage. For those that are strong enough to weather, of course, the other problem, we're going to see some further consolidation. But for those that can weather financially, and those that have flexibility, because the model of success for ILMAs is to have a business model that's mixed, that has multiple sources. You're not just, we have members here that have very broad product lines. They can adjust, and they've always had the ability to move into a market quickly and make the adjustments to take advantage of those. You're talking about larger competitors. Generally, they have larger plants. Their business model is around fewer products, larger volumes, a much more rigid supply chain. And those marketers are going to have the most difficulty in terms of adapting. So I think the opportunity is there for those that can weather the storm financially, manage their costs, and move quickly with this change. There are opportunities there. Bob, you want to pick up?
Certainly, from an economics perspective, the main driver for me would be confidence, both on the consumer side as well as on the business side. And confidence translates to spending, which translates to revenues for various companies. And then, that whole stimulating demand. And so that's what needs to happen to get the economies to really come back, is the demand that has gone away, at least over the last quarter, has to either come back or begin to at least grow. So my hope is that as the US and other countries begin to reopen, that those reopenings go smoothly, and that people start to find whatever the new normal is, right? There may be a delay of people doing things like going to restaurants or movie theaters or what have you. But as other sectors of the economy begin to come back, that the confidence grows, and then we just kind of get back on track, and this will be, I definitely would not say it'll be just a blip on the radar, but we'll at least start making positive traction away from it. The worst case scenario for me is if there's a significant resurgence, either over the summer or in the fall, because you're going to get the double whammy of the economies shutting down again. And I think the confidence level will go down even further, because now people will be in full-on panic mode that, until a vaccine comes along. So for me, the things that can help are just, things going smoothly, so confidence gets back up and consumers and businesses start spending money, albeit a bit slower than we might like, but at least, in a positive direction. The thing that would hold it back is if we haven't gotten on top of, the whole COVID thing and it comes back and causes another shutdown.
A few member questions really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We can run through those so we can move on to the next segment. But one quick question I think you could answer is, was the $14 billion generated by ILMA's manufacturing, the $14 billion, was that generated by ILMA's manufacturing members or the entire ILMA membership?
I'll go back to confirm this, but my recollection is it's the manufacturing members, the activity that they stimulate in North America.
Yep, that's what I.
Said.
Okay.
Yeah.
From Bob's last slide, Bob, it looks like the overall ILMA sales will rebound much quicker than metalworking. What sectors make up for metalworking's slow rebound? Will engine oils grow, or will ILMA's take share, from the majors? It's kind of
yeah. I'll have to ask Susan about this share shift thing.
I just made the case, Bob, about the ILMA members taking share.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yes, I mean, you can, again, based on what happened in the last recession, again, we saw the ILMA members responding more quickly. Now, how much more share? Right now, the ILMA share of the USA market is somewhere in the neighborhood of 35–40% of the marketplace. So how much more share can they take? But they do, it would indicate that there's room for them to make some gains.
A quick one here, light vehicle sales are North America, correct? Not US?
No, those should be US. I will confirm that as well too. But
okay.
I believe I took those out of our US forecast.
And then another one, given the consumer income has not reduced despite high unemployment, do you see a chance for quicker improvement in consumer spending than would otherwise be the case with such high unemployment?
I don't think so, because I think there's still a confidence issue.
Okay.
People are not going to want to go out and spend in droves initially. It'll take some time.
And then does the volume share of 27% for ILMAs account for the large volume of toll blending ILMAs do for majors? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe.
Yeah.
I believe that is correct. Yes.
That's my recollection. And then finally, do you anticipate R&D to increase to take advantage of the opportunity, or will R&D decrease as companies adjust to the new norm?
We did not delve into R&D in that analysis, but I don't know, Susan, if you have any thoughts on that?
R&D, I think marketers generally try to manage their technology spend, their R&D spend relative to sort of a percent of sales. So as sales drop, during this next couple of years, there's a certain amount though of minimum sustaining business that one has to do. So the ILMAs, remember the ILMAs too lean heavily on the additive companies, and the additive companies have pretty much been fairly flat to stable in their technology spend. again, relative to over time, even through some of these, the prior recessions. So I think that you will see some adjustments down, as you would expect. But again, ours is a technical industry, and you need to maintain product specifications. You need to maintain certain basic elements to be competitive. So there will be some adjustments down. There's no doubt about that, but I don't expect them to be significant at this point.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob and Susan. Great presentation. I know we're going to get, additional questions, and those who have questions, please send them to me, and I will get back to you with answers. We're going to move on to the next session. The pandemic has created a lot of challenges for ILMA members as essential businesses. And throughout that, we have attempted to address those issues by continually pushing out guidance as it became available, including providing an FAQ document on our website, which Jeff is going to get into. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuck so we can move on to the next session of our town hall.
Okay, thank you, Holly. And Bob and Susan, thank you very much for all that great information. In a session like this, it's hard to get it all in,
Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yes, thank you.
Very
Thanks for the opportunity.
A lot of info.
Thanks for having us.
And I'm sure a lot of members will look back at it and go over it on their own and may have some questions.
Yes, I did send a PDF to Holly. So
okay, and I'm
and
guessing
that'll
be on the website, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and I just want to mention that the full economic study that IHS did for ILMA is on the ILMA website under the Member Resources tab. So if you want to read the study, it's available.
Right.
All right, thank you.
okay, thank you.
Back with
Thanks for having us, Holly.
Yeah,
Yep.
we'll be back with more questions at the end, so don't go away.
Okay.
Okay.
So now I'm going to introduce our famous. Oh, I lost. Can people hear me?
Yep.
Did someone just put something up on their computer?
I did, Chuck. Yeah, I thought it was time for me.
Oh, okay. So it is time for you. I just got confused seeing that. So I'm here to introduce Jeff Leiter, our ILMA attorney and longtime friend of mine, and to all of us that are on this call. Jeff has been ILMA's general counsel for nearly 40 years. His intimate knowledge about the lubricants industry and member company operations is very vital to our organization. So Jeff, I'd like you to take it from here, and I'm going to get my mug off the screen.
Thank you, Chuck. And my timing is perfect. I just saw my wife drive up through the driveway and my dogs are barking. So I apologize, everyone.
Well, it's not a Zoom without an interruption from a dog. So,
yeah. But before I start my presentation, thanks, Chuck. I wanted to echo Holly's comments and say thank you. Thank you to each of you and your colleagues, your employees who have kept the doors on and the doors open and the lights on during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our frontline healthcare workers rightfully deserve all the praise that they've been receiving, as well as our thanks. But so does everyone else in essential businesses, such as ILMA member companies, who showed up every day. So for me, sincerely, thank you. Moving on, over the past 3 months, I've talked with a number of ILMA members about human resource issues, including workplace safety, as member companies have really struggled in some instances to address the myriad of issues raised by the COVID-19 pandemic. Clearly, there are many topics none of us contemplated just a few short months ago. And through my conversations, and as depicted by the slide that you see up on the screen, there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of questions and certainly a lot of strategies that everyone has moving forward in what I'll call the COVID era. I've distilled those discussions down into the three areas that are columns or buckets that you see on the slide. First is how do member companies continue to keep employees safe in the workplace? Second, what accommodations, if any, do they want to make to perhaps allow for remote work. And third, the steps that are needed to avoid lawsuits, claims in the process that as they relate to, let's say, new leave entitlements, unsafe workplace conditions, and a host of other matters. So the time we have right now doesn't allow me to get into detail on each of these items in the bucket. We did post on ILMA's website today, ilma.org. If you go to the red box on the homepage about frequently asked questions, you'll see some new HR-specific Q&As that we put up today. Hopefully some of those will answer maybe a couple of the topics that I talk about in the next few minutes. And certainly during our Q&A session at the end of my presentation, I'm happy to address as many of your questions as possible. There are two key takeaways from my talk with you this afternoon. First is, and you'll hear me repeat this a few times, communication is essential as well as in new training. And then second, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, as no two ILMA members are really totally alike, nor is going to be their approach. Many of the states have put in place separate guidance, let's say just on the issue of taking employees' temperatures. Many of the states have different requirements at this point, depending on the type of business and number of employees and such. But so let me turn to these steps or adjustments that ILMA members and other employers are taking to keep their employees safe. I'm looking at this first bucket here. You know, frankly, there's a bevy of actions to keep employees safe. In addition to CDC and OSHA guidance, which likely will establish a standard of care when we get into the liability issue or a floor, many companies simply are asking others, what are you doing? You know, and how are you getting it done with your folks? Most ILMA members have told me that they've increased their cleaning efforts, including the frequency of deep cleaning of their facilities, in both the plants as well as in the offices, the administrative offices. You know, cleaning and disinfecting themselves bring their own set of issues, including under the OSHA standards. Additionally, ILMA members have taken steps to facilitate distancing of employees in the workplace, such as split shifts, modifying work schedules, physical changes to limit employee contact in the workplace, such as break and lunch areas or even conference rooms. It seems somewhat incongruous to me because, you know, many employees come to work to socialize. They want to see other folks. And so this is an area where communication and training becomes critical to me. If efforts are to maintain social distancing are to be successful and enforced with a minimal amount of heavy hand, the training is going to be essential there. It's going to take people some time to get used to new way of doing things. Certainly an area that's received a lot of attention is providing or encouraging the use of face coverings, gloves, other PPE, and you know, steps are being taken by a number of companies to manage COVID exposures in the workplace by using these efforts. One of the issues that's kind of hot right now, in terms of, I don't mean it in a facetious way in terms of taking temperatures, but health screenings and testing of employees is something that a lot of folks are looking at right now. There remains a lot of uncertainty in this particular area. As I mentioned a couple seconds ago, a number of states now have specific requirements that apply to taking employees' temperatures, where and how those things should be done. Certainly, the EEOC has given employers the go-ahead to take temperature checks based on it being a medical examination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So again, much remains unclear in my mind with regard to testing and other forms of health screenings. And I'll add, including antibody or antigen testing. You know, so the implementation issues with privacy, the litigation risks are significant in this particular area. Clearly from my talks with member companies, the financial costs of these plans and addressing and procedures to address safety concerns with employees are going to outlive the virus. You know, when you tie it to what Susan and Bob have talked about, it's, you know, it's somewhat sobering. My guess is that most ILMA member companies will need to revise their employee handbooks or manuals. It's going to be a challenge, really, in my mind, to strike an appropriate balance between upholding the company's workplace culture, as it's been, as well as employee morale, while implementing these safety measures to address COVID-19. You know, stated differently, I think ensuring culture, employee engagement, performance and productivity, all while enforcing these necessary safety measures is going to require this clear and consistent communication and training that I've mentioned now a few times. Let me turn to the second bucket in the middle of the screen. The COVID-19 pandemic has driven a dramatic rise in the number of employees working remotely for ILMA member companies. While many jobs at company facilities require being there on site, there are others that necessarily do not. And many employers that I've talked to, including with the ILMA members, are rethinking remote work, but it poses a tricky balancing act. For some companies, the shift to working remotely for some employees may be permanent, requiring those, and I emphasize the word requiring those employees to work remotely, in part or maybe largely to reduce operating costs. If you can cut down having to add some office space, then maybe that's a thing to do. But at the same time, some of those employees you may want to require to work remotely, they want to come to work. They may have cramped space in their office. They may have kids or roommates that are an interference. Others may find, however, that seeking to stay at remote, seeking to stay at home and work remotely for any number of reasons. They may be concerned with safety coming to the office, childcare unavailability issues. Some of these reasons may be valid and others may not. Sorting this out becomes the challenge for the employer. As a result, many ILMA member companies have told me that they plan to be as flexible as possible with accommodating remote work requests, at least until the COVID-19 pandemic abates and subsides. Others have said that they can, they're planning to allow employees to work remotely if they've been able to prove that they can do so effectively. My message really with this middle column is that companies across the board are offering employees more flexibility as they navigate the pandemic, but the future of work from home remains uncertain and certainly going to be an HR challenge for most of the companies in ILMA. Lastly, when we go to the right-hand column, you should know that debate continues today on Capitol Hill for liability shields for employers, especially those essential businesses such as yours that have remained open over the last few months. We're already seeing an uptick in the number of lawsuits and coronavirus-related claims that are being filed. Here in Washington, the Washington Post carried a story a couple of weeks ago. There's a class action website called Top Class Actions. It's funded by plaintiffs' lawyers who are looking to drum up business. In the month of April alone, they had over 10,000 submissions to this website for people asking to review. So, in my mind, the notion of providing employers acting in good faith at a time when there's often conflicting and inconsistent messages coming, not only from the federal government, but state and local governments. That notion of protecting and giving this liability shield has garnered some pushback from legislators on Capitol Hill. ILMA is part of a coalition, actually two groups. I participated in a call yesterday with staff from Senator Cornyn's office from Texas. I think we're starting to see some softening on the Democrat side, who are largely, we receive a lot of funding from the trial lawyers, but a lot remains to be done. So when you see these alerts come in from Chuck and Holly asking you to engage your representatives or senators, it certainly would be helpful for your businesses if you could do so. In looking specifically at those items in the liability column there, I think it's reasonable to expect, based on what I just said, to see increases in claims or lawsuits related to leave of absence entitlements, unsafe work conditions, workers' comp, and privacy practices. The leave entitlements issue is fascinating to me as a lawyer because of the difficulty in navigating this tangled web of criteria in the federal, state, and local laws related to leave. For example, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act is a perfect example of how companies can be left vulnerable to litigation. In my opinion, the wave of COVID-19 employee-related litigation has just begun, but it's been begun in haste. And it poses a real challenge to employers who have been grappling with a multitude of issues, while keeping their doors open through this difficult time. I think from my perspective, sufficient confidence only will come with protections from Congress, even though most employers feel that they've operated within the law during these past few months.
Yep, on that note, I'm going to interrupt with a couple questions now.
Okay, I just was in my last going to say thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to open it up to members if you want to throw out some questions to either Jeff, I guess Jeff first, and or Bob and Susan. Please feel free to type them out on the Q&A chat function. So Jeff, you mentioned quickly the liability protection legislation, and I know that we've tried to get members engaged on that issue. What do you think the timing is of Congress taking that up?
Until yesterday, Holly, I thought that that Congress was looking at another stimulus bill, and Speaker McConnell had said he was interested in getting it through Congress by the 4th of July holiday. The House sent over a payroll protection bill to the Senate the other day to make changes to the PPP program, including lengthening the amount of time that folks could use the money. Some of the Senate staff in that call yesterday thought that could take some of the pressure off of moving this additional stimulus bill. The Senate leader, McConnell, has said that no bill will get through the Senate without liability protections. I think there'll be a lot of negotiation. The bill now, if the PPP thing comes up and separates out, could be later in July rather than by the July 4th holiday. My guess is right now that some of the Democrats who are softening are saying, well, we agree with you, but we want to see that the employer who kept doors open followed certain OSHA standards. So they're going to want some proof that that there was a good faith attempt to comply with these guidelines. And so that's why I mentioned the CDC and OSHA guidance, likely establishing the floor, and why we've been promoting people looking at those as often as they can and trying to comply with them.
Right, and I just want to mention that please check out if you haven't done it, the COVID-19 resource page on our website. You can get to it right from our homepage. We have all of the links to the CDC guidance and OSHA recommendations and so on. So if you have any questions related to that, a lot of that can be found on the ILMA website. In addition, we've been putting out alerts on this liability protection, which I think is very important. So if you haven't responded to it and contacted your representatives, I encourage you to do so ASAP. As Jeff said, we could be looking at some action on this, maybe as soon as, prior to 4th of July. So let's, now is the time to act on that. And we will continue to keep everyone updated on that. We have a couple of questions for Bob and Susan, if they could just come back quickly. And we'll take those and then we'll probably wrap up after that. One is, Bob, can you define sector-wise demand loss of metalworking fluids? Demand loss. Can you define sector-wise demand loss of metalworking fluids?
Well,
or Susan?
Bob, you want me to help you on that one?
Yeah, because it would be driven by the volume side first. And the
Yeah,
price.
well, Bob, you and I have talked about this, and I think, you know, I think a lot of there's another question out there too. There was a question about, is the metalworking demand loss based on aircraft and auto production slowdowns? And I think the answer is yes. So I think I would expect that a large portion of the metalworking picture is tied to the outlook on the aircraft and automotive industry, and that's in large part the change. You would say, Bob?
Yeah, in the transportation equipment sector in general, the 2020 revenue growth is down like 20 to 30% depending on the subsector of it. So that's a significant dip that then ripples its way through to the metalworking fluid sector.
Those are the two largest sectors in North America. So, and that's, you know, goes without saying that given the condition of those sectors and the pace of recovery, that's the big impact without being quantitative.
And does that ties into the smaller operators that are making parts for those industries? So
Exactly.
they're
down into the supply chain of the automotive and aircraft industry. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I have some of that here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, automotive parts is, I don't have that number right there. I have an index number for it, but it is down quite a bit as well too.
Yes.
Yeah, motor vehicle parts are down index-wise from 2018, so this is a little bit different than growth rate. Is down to 70, you know, whereas 2018 is the basis is 100 points, you know, on the index. In 2020, it's going to be down to 70 for the auto parts.
Yeah,
so that's
people
quite a
aren't
dip.
driving too. So
Yeah,
the parts, you know, the automotive shops are down on parts and different things.
yeah.
Another question we have, does the forecasted recovery in 2021 through 2025 include any expectation of the manufacturing base migrating from Asia back to North America? That's a question that I've had in the last few weeks. So can you comment?
Yeah. I think it's a little too early to tell. I think there kind of a parallel question is, are there structural changes to the economies as a result of COVID? You know, is the distribution of industries across different regions going to shift over time? And right now, it's a little too early to tell that. It's easy to kind of say yes, you know, that the COVID situation has exposed some critical supply chain issues that we might want to move more manufacturing back to the U.S. to make sure that we're not exposed should another pandemic happen.
Right. And
that's today, right? But you know, the human condition is we never seem to learn. So over time, wherever things can be done more cheaply, we'll probably, you know, see some of that continue to migrate that way. So we kind of have to wait and see right now. I don't see any major structural shifts happening yet in our forecast. I think maybe a little bit will come back onshore, but not a whole, you know, most of it will not come back. I don't think yet.
Well, the economics, I mean, we've been investing over there to be close to the customers there. That's been the growth market. Up to this point, China's been the growth engine. And as we go forward, China's no longer a growth engine in many respects for the lubricants industry. So, and then at the same time, you have policies. It's not just structural, but you have government policies as related to China. So you have Japan making, the new government making policies saying they're going to move certain manufacturing type of labor-intensive manufacturing back to Japan. to move those jobs back to Japan. But generally in the industry, we've seen more of, wouldn't you say, fragmentation across Asia. You have industries moving from China to other neighboring countries and really
Vietnam.
Yes, yes. So you have the policy side of drum beating about China and shall we move things back from China to US, but we also have economics at play. And the last time I looked at direct investment into China and manufacturing from outside, that investment level's been maintained over the last year or two. Now, what will happen after COVID's another story, as Bob said. Are we going to continue?
Yeah, because one thing to keep in mind is economies, whether you're talking a country or the global economy, are really, at their heart, complex adaptive systems. It takes a lot to move them. So there's a lot of momentum. So it's sort of the Titanic and the iceberg kind of metaphor. Depends on how big an iceberg COVID really turns out to be, whether to see how much we need to get the ship turned or how much the ship will turn.
Right. Jeff, we do have a question for you. I don't know if you can see it on the screen here, but it's how much flexibility do employers have in using FFCRA time in handling employee illness? Can employers send an employee home for illness due to COVID concerns, even if the symptoms are not directly associated with COVID, such as an upset stomach? Paid leave under FFCRA refers to COVID-related illness. Can you comment on that, Jeff?
Yeah, well, again, the Labor Department has issued various guidance already and is continuing to address issues that come up with respect to the FFCRA. Generally, under the current mode that everyone's been operating under, if an employee shows symptoms, they can be sent home. Right now, the expectation is that you pay them when you send them home and then make a determination as to whether they actually have the coronavirus and have to take some form of sick leave or that at that point. But at least the day you send them home, they should be paid. With respect to these other issues, again, I refer everyone that I think we've got it up through the website to the guidance that the Labor Department has put up. It's
Yes.
somewhat detailed and it's hard to walk through.
Okay. That's it for the questions. So I just want to thank all the members who logged in and joined us for this town hall. Bob, Susan, Jeff, thank you so much for your presentations. They were outstanding. We will have all of this available. We've recorded this session and we will have the slides available on the ILMA website. So stay tuned for details on that. If you have any questions after the fact, please feel free to shoot me an email, halfano@ilma.org, and I'd be happy to get back to you. Chuck, do you have any closing comments?
No, thank you guys. The presenters were great today. We appreciate it. And everybody have a great weekend and hope we'll see you in October in Boca.
Yes.
And I might even have my officiating suit on again.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
For having us. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, I ended the meeting.